Hey, Professor here. Welcome to my comprehensive guide on the Retribution Paladin. And so hopefully after watching this video, you will better understand your Rep Paladin. So what we'll do is we will start with talents, and then we'll move into artifact, and then we'll go into add-ons, keybinds, and macros, and then we'll get to the gear and legendaries, then we'll go into playstyle and abilities, and then I'll show you a little bit of footage on how this stuff kind of works in a dungeon scenario and a raid scenario. And so I'll try to keep this as short as I can, but as informative as I can. And so we'll start with the talents. And talents. So what you can do is open up your talents here, and we'll kind of see what we need to do. For your talents, this is usually the nice thing about the Rep Paladin at the moment is that you're kind of stuck in what you choose. It's good and bad, right? Because I kind of like playing a variety of different ways within the same spec, like some classes do. But Rep Paladins are kind of stuck with this build at the moment. And you can kind of, there's evidence of that because what you can do is you can go to this website and Warcraft logs. It's a great place. And so what you can do is just go to Paladin and then go to Retribution. And then what this does is for every fight, it will break down the spec that most people are using for that particular fight. And if we look here, you'll kind of see that my spec mirrors that. And it just so happened, actually, when I found this out, I hadn't looked at this, but it turns out I was running the same spec as them before I even looked at this. So it looks like everybody's on the same page with Final Verdict as your first talent. Execution Sentence, it's a little tricky to use. So pretty much it deals damage after 5.5 seconds, and making sure that your judgment is on when that actually goes off is a pretty big deal. So that's, I think, why a lot of people don't use this. It just makes for a really awkward situation. Consecrate, possibly for AoE, but I mean, Final Verdict also buffs your Divine Storm. So yeah, like I said, you're pretty much locked into this right now. Greater Judgment, our new tier bonus here. So if we go back to just this, if you look at the 4 set and the 2 set, it's kind of all about using your judgment, right? So judgment damage is increased by 40%, and this greater judgment allows you to hit an additional 2 nearby enemies. So if you read it, it says judges your target and up to 3 nearby enemies. If you don't spec for that, then it's only 1 other nearby enemy. So this is really helpful for AoE because you can get your judgment buff on more people. And then remember, when you have your judgment, I guess you could call it a debuff on those targets that you're attacking, they're going to take 69% increased damage. It's based on your mastery. And so if you read your mastery, it says increases your judgment damage by a certain amount and causes your judgment to increase the damage taken from your holy power spenders for the next 8 seconds. So it's kind of interesting how on a fight like Garathi Worldbreaker, which is pretty much purely single target, you actually still take greater judgment for all of the top parses. And so, you know, if you're doing over 2 million damage and you're rocking this, I think everybody's on the same page here. Literally, there's very few variations within the spec here. So everybody takes Final Verdict and then Greater Judgment, right? So we can kind of scroll down through the bosses, and it looks like everybody's on the same page with the first 2 for all the bosses in the current raid. And so we'll go to the next, Fist of Justice. I just prefer that, but I will run Repentance sometimes if we need that CC, like in a Mythic Plus scenario. Binding Light also has its place too for more of an AoE CC, but I find Fist of Justice is pretty nice. And then you don't have an additional ability to worry about. You can get more stuns off, and so on. So I usually run Fist of Justice. Not really a big deal though, it's your choice. So Blade of Wrath is your next choice. This makes for some interesting play because your auto attacks now have a chance to reset the cooldown of your Blade of Justice. So just from auto attacking, your Blade of Justice is your ability that generates 2 holy power. So this is going to be resetting every now and then, just randomly, based on your auto attacks. And that's super nice because that means that you instantly can generate another 2 holy power if you hit this again, and it also does a decent amount of damage. So Blade of Wrath is the go-to, and we can kind of compare that to what everybody else is running for the top parses here. Looks like Blade of Wrath is the go-to. However, you will see a little bit of a talent swap here on a fight like Antoran High Command. You're going to maybe go with Divine Hammer, right? So when we go to more of an AoE situation like ENR, right, maybe we're going to use Divine Hammer instead. Then we go back to Portal Keeper, which not as much AoE. We're going to maybe go back to Blade of Wrath. MNR, Blade of Wrath, and looks like the majority of the rest of it's Blade of Wrath. So looks like the 2 fights where you might want to consider running Divine Hammer instead would be ENR and Antoran High Command. And so pretty much what that does, this Divine Hammer, it's going to replace your Blade of Justice, and so when you use it, it's going to be more of an AoE. The hammers spin around you. So I guess that makes sense on those fights why you would do that. So maybe those 2 fights you can swap it up a little bit, but for the most part you're probably just going to run with Blade of Wrath. That's just a general all-around good thing for generating extra holy power. And so the next thing is kind of a toss-up. You'll see how people enjoy different things, like Eye for an Eye, or some people run Justicar's Vengeance. You'll even see some people running Word of Glory. So that is kind of a toss-up. You don't really care. It's just based on your situation. I like Word of Glory in a party environment, or like whenever I'm trying to throw some extra heals on my group. But notice how this does use holy power, right? The one that doesn't use holy power is Eye for an Eye. Justicar's Vengeance also uses holy power. And so if you're looking for a holy power spender that actually heals you and is more of a kind of a defensive ability, then you're going to go with either Word of Glory for like multi-target, and then Justicar's Vengeance is what I use for like single target healing. It's pretty nice when you get your Divine Purpose to proc to give you a free ability, and then you can use a 5 holy power heal for free when you get your Divine Purpose to proc. So that's pretty nice. Eye for an Eye is clearly only going to help you against physical damage. So remember, we want to maximize everything that we do with our talents and everything. So if we're in a situation where we're not taking physical damage, you probably don't want to take Eye for an Eye. It's not really going to help you. So just keep that in mind when you're picking your talents. Now, Divine Intervention is usually what I suspect most paladins are running. Now I'm only looking at the top parses for this, and by the way, I am on Mythic difficulty, so we could also look at Heroic. It is similar. We could also look by item level, but these are the Mythic rating rep paladins. Many of these people are much better than I am, but I'm trying to get some information out there that will help you. So Divine Intervention is that auto bubble, right? So that's going to allow you to not have to worry as much about your bubble. It just makes you feel safe. You don't have to press it. It'll just automatically press itself. So you're making maximum use of your bubble. It's only going off when you really need it. And then some people run Cavalier. I do switch to Cavalier a lot because everybody knows Rep Paladin's not the best for mobility. So I do have rocket boots, and I do have my Cavalier sometimes when I manually press bubble. And then Judgment of Light, I suppose, could help heal on the raid. Let's see if anybody runs the Judgment of Light here. So we're looking in this column. Looks like not too many. I don't really see anybody running it. So it could offer some extra heals to your raid, but I think a lot of these top parsing paladins are probably pretty selfish, and they might like do things in order to parse, and if it's not going to help their parse, they're probably not going to do it. So Judgment of Light is not really going to help you that much. It's mainly, putting that Judgment of Light on your target, helping out your people that are attacking, including you. But okay, last one is Divine Purpose and Crusade are your 2 choices here. Holy Wrath is kind of an awkward thing. You can read it, but it's pretty much only useful for a certain scenario that you're probably not going to be in. So it deals, it says it deals 200% of your missing health in holy damage to 4 nearby enemies. So if you had 4 nearby enemies and you were low, so it's 200% of your missing health, then hey, it might be worth it, but like that's kind of a certain scenario that doesn't happen very often. So we're gonna in general go with Crusade. That's what everybody does. However, you also have to look at this. So why are they going with Crusade? Well, it's because every one of them has Soul of the High Lord. So, I mean, you look at, so pretty much if you don't have Soul of the High Lord, then don't play a Paladin. No, I'm just kidding. So, but if you don't have Soul of the High Lord, it's going to make your playstyle definitely a little different. So you look at all of the top legendary for everything is Soul of the High Lord, Soul of the High Lord. Literally, I don't even see a Paladin even on the top 10 who does not have Soul of the High Lord. Every single fight, you're using Soul of the High Lord. And so that allows you to get the best of both worlds because you have Divine Purpose for that proc, but you also have Crusade. So definitely the best of both worlds there. So I would look for Soul of the High Lord, and then you can get the best of both worlds. You don't even have to worry about it. If you don't have Soul of the High Lord, probably still go with Crusade. But remember, Crusade is not the best for initial burst. It takes some time to build up. So if your fight's only going to last 10 seconds, then you probably want to go with Divine Purpose. It's just up to you, right? If you want that quick initial burst, Crusade's only going to start off at 3% haste in damage, whereas if you don't have Crusade, it'll start right at the max. You don't have to build it up. So Crusade's definitely the one that takes a little bit more skill because to make maximum use out of. You want to build it up as quick as you can. So I think that goes over the talents, and so now we will go into something different. Let's go into, let's see here, Artifact. So Artifact is right here. So I got lucky with some relics, so my weapon is 988. And so really what you're looking for is pretty much what I have in this relic, this 960 Holy Relic. High Lord's Judgment is going to increase the damage of your Judgment, and that's going to be huge, especially with the current play style. It's all about Judgment, so it is based on the current meta, and things change, all right? But this is a guide that hopefully is somewhat timeless. And you're going to go with Wrath of the Ashbringer. So the idea is you want to make your Crusade longer, right? Your wings is going to happen, and it's not going to end as quickly, so you're going to have more time at the maximum stacks of your Crusade to do damage, which is amazing. An extra 2 seconds per thing here. So look, I have 2 traits in it right now, so it extends the duration for 2 seconds per rank, right? So I have 6 ranks, so it's 12 seconds extra. So my wings last for 32 seconds right now. Which is huge, right? Huge. And then the High Lord's Judgment. So if you look at this, I also have High Lord's Judgment and Wrath of the Ashbringer. Both of my Holy Relics give High Lord's Judgment, Wrath of the Ashbringer. Those are most likely your top 2 that you're going to be looking for. And then this one, it's not really the best, right? It literally reduces the cooldown of my Blessing of Protection, which is like the last thing that you want. However, it is a 970 fire relic, so I obviously couldn't pass it up because like it's 970, right? So my other one was like 950, so 20. I mean, just the amount of stats that it gives to your weapon, you have to factor that in too. So yeah, it's not the best, but hey, it's 970, so I went with it. But that's the kind of thing that you're doing in the Crucible. You can also pull up a guide here, and you can go to the Crucible for Ret Paladin. Okay, Crucible Ret Paladin, spelled wrong. Here you go. And then they have a little bit of a guide here for you if you want additional advice. Yeah, see how the top one's Wrath of the Ashbringer and then High Lord's Judgment. And then after that, you got some other ones, but those are the main 2 you're looking for. And then you can look for these as your number 1, your Infusion of Light, your Torment of the Week, or your Secure in the Light. And those are going to be 3.8 item levels. So this is usually pretty accurate. And so that's what you should do for that. just a couple things though that you should be familiar with. If we go through this, when you deal damage to a target afflicted by judgment, it has a 50% chance to spread to a nearby target. So that's pretty interesting. I don't know if you knew that. A lot of times people don't take the time to read this, but hey, I'll take the time for you to go through it real quick with you. When both your greater blessings are active, hopefully you know this, but I forget it all the time, so it's worth mentioning. When you activate your greater blessings, notice how you get an additional buff here called Blessing of the Ashbringer, increases your strength by 4%. So if you watch my strength, let me take one of my buffs off. My strength will drop. Okay, it goes down. It's 45,000 now about. I put that buff back on. It goes up. It's almost like 47,000. So definitely that strength is helping you out, increase the magnitude of your attacks and abilities. Be aware of that. Don't forget to buff yourself. If your damage is lower than usual, that might be the reason. And then we go to a couple other ones. This is pretty cool, actually. I've used this before purposefully. Right? It only happens every 2 minutes, but when you're unable to act, when you get CC'd, then you, for more than 2 seconds, your Ashbringer will automatically break you out of that. So sometimes I purposely get CC'd, or like I will cheese a mechanic because I know I'm going to get out of it anyway. So that's pretty cool to know about. There is another couple things here. So right here, this is the one that I kind of want to explain because I wasn't really aware of this. So Divine Tempest, Ashbringer projects Divine Storm forward 20 yards, damaging all enemies in his path. So that's the part that I want to explain. So when you divine, let's do this, and I have some noises. Hopefully it's not too annoying. Okay, it's monitoring some cooldowns when I play. So here you go. So I'm gonna do my Divine Storm from way back here, and you'll see how it's sent forward. And I can do it again. See how it's sent forward? It projects forward, which you need to know that, right? Because watch this. So let me project it this way. Right? Watch this. No damage. See? That's a big deal, right? So I go like this. I have damage on these targets. It projects forward. It does damage. I go like this. Try to get in the same position I was before. I turn around like this. No damage. No damage. Problem, right? That's a big problem if you don't know that, because you're losing damage, especially in an AoE situation. That means you need to be facing the other target. If you're trying a cleave rotation here and you're faced like this would probably be ideal, because you are then going to project, right? Project it out at that other one rather than go like this and then it's not projected towards this target. So try to always position yourself so that outward in a multi-target situation, so 2 or more is when you're going to want to use Divine Storm, because if you just read the damage here, right? So for this does 429,000, this does 740. Some easy math tells you that you should probably use Divine Storm at 2 or more targets, okay? Especially when it's getting buffed on that other target too by the Judgment. So big deal, 2 or more targets, Divine Storm. Make sure that you're facing. Make sure that you're facing who you're attacking. Get as many people in that as you can. The Divine Tempest. And I think the rest are pretty good. However, this is kind of interesting, right? So Divine Storm also heals up to 6 nearby allied players for a little amount. I mean, it's barely noticeable, but it happens. And I think that's the majority of it. You should know by now that your Wake of Ashes generates 5 holy power. And so when you use Wake of Ashes, you're going to want to make sure that you're pretty much empty with your holy power. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. So we are done with the artifact. So let's move on. And I want to kind of do this guide a little differently. I want to move into the add-ons, keybinds, and macros first. So with the keybinds and macros, let me no particular order to this, but add-ons, keybinds, macros, let's start that discussion. So I have a few here. One of them that's helpful to me is that I keybound, I macroed together my Horn of Valor, which is on a 2-minute cooldown, and my Wings, which is on a 2-minute cooldown. it works together perfectly so that I pop my horn, and they both last for about 30 seconds. I'm thinking about it, I probably should delay it a little bit so that my Horn of Valor is up for that last like 2 seconds of my wings. But I don't know, just out of convenience, I have them keybound together or like macroed together. So I really don't use too many other macros. I just mainly use that one for my Avenging Wrath / Crusade, and that's about it. So I'm sure there might be some other interesting ones that you could use, but that's about all I use. In terms of add-ons, so I use DBM, Deadly Boss Mods, to make sure that I'm aware of what's happening during the boss fights, or Mythic Plus scenario. I use Bagnons to keep my items together, and I can search for items in my inventory. It makes that pretty easy. I use Bartender 4, which is right here. It allows me to keep my bars nice and organized and adjust them, and I can also keybind pretty easily. I just hit the keybind button. It allows me to keybind anything I want. In terms of keybinds, I do try to keybind similar abilities together. So I'll go ahead and keybind like Templar's Verdict and Divine Storm. Since they're both my spenders, I'll keybind them together on the same key. And then I'll keybind my 2 builders on the same key. My artifact ability and judgment are over here. A lot of the reason I do this is, number one, so I can make my playstyle fluid. I want to be able to have, I'm not going to put my Templar's Verdict on 1 and then Divine Storm on 6. That just doesn't make sense. So, at least not to me. So I have a mouse that will be able to have all of this first row on it. It's a 12-button mouse. Then I also have different keybinds down here. I would recommend keybinding. It just makes you, if you're trying to click on your stuff, it's just not going to work as well. You're not going to have as much time. You're going to be focusing on what you're clicking on rather than what's going on around you. So definitely try to keybind everything. The other reason is that I switch between specs. So if I switch to Prot, you'll notice that my Judgment stays in the same place and my Taunt stays in the same place, for example. And then if I switch to Holy, you'll notice that my Judgment and Taunt stay in the same place, just as an example. And so it really just makes it easy for me to switch between the specs, and that's kind of why I have it set up the way I have it. It works for me. Just find something that works for you. I have a interface is Z-Perl. It used to be X-Perl, now it's called Z-Perl. That's where you get all these the 3D portraits, and you get the focus target down here if you want. You move it anywhere you want. I have WeakAuras, so /WeakAura. This is for sound feedback on my cooldowns. So after certain things are up, let's see if you can hear this. So I'll use my Judgment, and when that Judgment comes up, it makes like an annoying sound. We'll see. So 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second, and you should hear like a ching sound. It's kind of annoying, but like it does alert me that it's back up and it's ready. A lot of times when you're playing, you don't really have time to look, and just that extra feedback is helpful. Also, the wings, when I pop Crusade, it'll be monitored over here, and it will also give me a sound feedback when it's back off cooldown. So that's kind of nice. So WeakAuras allows you to do that. It also allows you to do this, for example. Over here, I can monitor. I didn't do this one. It's just something that I got from this person who made it. Raid cooldowns. It just allows you to see whose cooldowns are ready. That's really nice, especially as a leader. I also have details. I have 4 different windows open. One is for damage, one is for healing, one's for damage taken, and one is for my spells, so I can look at what's going on in terms of what's doing the most damage. That's just kind of interesting for me. You don't need this. And then notice how all my other stuff that I don't really care about is kind of out of the way. So it's generally how I have my screen set up. I also have GTFO, which tells me if I'm standing in something bad. I have ORA3, which I believe that's just like my battle res timer or something like that. I forget what these mods do after a while. So RCLootCouncil we use for loot. I use Spy for like PvP, world PvP. I used to be a huge PvPer. not as much anymore. And so what else? We did Z-Perl's Angry Keystones is a good one for Mythic Plus. Just monitors like 2 chests, 3 chests type of thing off to the side, and it auto activates bosses and different things like that. It's pretty nice. And then the really 2 interesting ones that you guys need to focus on, I think, it's really helped me, is something called Pawn. So /pawn. And this shows up, and it can be linked to raid bots, which is great. So you're looking at pretty much the items in your bag. It'll tell you if it's an upgrade. And the generic one is all right, but you can put in your own. So pretty much what you can do, /sim_c, and it'll give you, this is the other one, Simulationcraft, combined with Pawn. And if you're not familiar with this, I'll briefly discuss how it's done. So you copy and paste this with your current gear on, and then you can come over into here. We can go to raid bots. All right, so pretty much I'm going to /sim_c, and I'm into here, and I'm going to hit Quick Sim. It's free. Down here, run Quick Sim. And pretty much what this will do is, I'm in queue right now. So it'll take a second. You can become a patron if you want, and then it doesn't take as long. But the idea is it'll kind of give you an idea of what your damage is going to be like. This is for 100,000 iterations on a patchwork fight, so this is with no movement and single target. You can also adjust this, and it really allows you to get a good idea of what your DPS should be. And you can also compare, gear. We'll get into that in a second, what gear is the best and stuff like that. You can also, so I'll get this simming again, and then I'll come back and I'll copy and paste it again into the stat weights. You can also do this with stat weights, and we can generate stat weights for me. And I'll get that queuing, and then from there you can put your stat weights into the pawn. So that is pretty cool, and it really allows you to kind of test your gear, because I think DPS is more of a science rather than an art, like healing and tanking. That's kind of how I like to describe it. I mean, DPS is like literally down to the science. What should you be doing to maximize your DPS? Healing is not always about maximizing your HPS. It's about, kind of what to do in different scenarios, and I feel like it's more of an art. Same thing with tanking. But when it comes down to DPS, you just really want to get on those sims, and it really kind of helps you test your gear rather than you manually testing everything and kind of wasting your life testing, especially for casual players. You don't want to do that. And so I think that covers the mods, the keybinds, and the macros. Let's move on to the gear and the legendaries. Okay, so the gear and the legendaries we are going to talk about briefly. Remember, we can go to this pretty much Warcraft logs, and you can go to for all classes. No, we want to go to Ret. Okay. And then it'll show us what's going on. We can easily look at the legendaries and say, hey, Soul of the High Lord is your top legendary for every fight. So we're going to go with Soul of the High Lord. If you don't have that, then your other options are Chain, right? Chain's pretty good. Legendaries, the other ring, is okay. The Cloak is probably going to be your best too. So the Cloak comboed with the Soul of the High Lord is probably going to be what you want to go with. However, the Cloak is a little tricky to maximize because you want to make sure that you're getting your Templar's Verdicts or your Divine Storms off within 4 seconds of each other. So you don't necessarily want to do back-to-back Templar's Verdict, Divine Storms. You might want to do a little bit of building in between. An easier one would just be to run Soul of the High Lord and the Chain of Thrain. I'm sure it's not that big of a DPS difference, right? So we're talking, like, for example, on here, this person was wearing the chain, and they're literally like, I don't know, like 30,000 DPS behind or something like that. So It's really not that big of a deal, but I do feel like Whispers is better. Since I've been running it, it feels better for sure. This is what the sim looks like when it's done. So it sims my gear, right? So all of my gear with my 4 set, and I can switch out. Like I just got Arcano Crystal not too long ago, and I put it in there against a 940 Eye of Command, and it came out better, which is nice because I don't have to worry about switching targets now. I can just switch targets all I want. It's not that big of a deal. So this is kind of what you're going to do for your gear and your stat weights too. So here's your stat weights. Mastery comes out on top, then Verse, then Crit, then Haste, then Strength. But this is my specific ones based on the sim. So I really think that this does a decent job. Even if you go to like Ret, Pally, Stat, priority, okay? If you go to something like this and you click on that, like it's going to tell you that Mastery is like equivalent to Haste, and versatility and crit and strength are equal. It really doesn't help you that much, does it? So, and it says these statistics have been obtained by combining common sense, in-game testing, and simulations through Simulationcraft. So that's kind of what we're focused on, right? So we're looking at our gear that we have, not the ideal gear, but you know, the gear that we have, and we're going to see what we have that does the best, and sim it and see how it does. And so that's kind of the idea. Remember, you can also upload the pawn string. So you put the copy to clipboard or whatever. You can copy this, and then you go into pawn, so \pawn, and then you can go into here, import, and then you can import that, and then it'll specifically tell you what piece of gear is better. So Retribution Raid Bots, this says that this is a 32% upgrade, but that's a 32% upgrade over a non-legendary. So like this scenario, it says Ret is an 11% upgrade, but I click on it, and so really what we care about is the Raid Bot one, because that's the one that we put in. So Raid Bot is the 3% upgrade, so I'm gonna go with the Raid Bot one, not the built-in Ret one. And so that really customizes the pawn mod to what you got and what's going to work best for you. It says that this is a 6% upgrade, right? But then you got to kind of play around with it, because that's my tier piece, right? So you definitely have to play around a little bit. In terms of enchants, a lot of the neck enchants come out very similar. So like Mark of the Claw, we can go into the enchants real quick. So neck enchants would be Mark of the Claw, and then you can do Mark of the Trained Soldier for mastery, and then you can also do the other one that procs for damage, but they're all about the same. I prefer Mark of the Claw. In terms of gems, you can go with either haste or mastery. It's kind of like, what are you low on? Right now I'm about 30% crit, 30% haste approximately, and then 60% mastery, about 10-15% versatility. So I'm comfortable with these at the moment. It's kind of the best that I can get out of the gear that I have. So that's really what it's all about. Is it's not as much like, hey, you need to look for gear with all mastery. Okay, it's that you need to get gear and then collect gear and then kind of swap pieces in and out, and that's what these top DPS people do all the time. They're just constantly swapping their gear to try to maximize their DPS. And so they're not just throwing on gear randomly and saying, oh, mastery is the best stat for me, so I need to get it up to 100%. No, it's not about that, right? It's about kind of the right balance, and that's where Simulationcraft comes in. So for trinkets, you're going to want Unstable Arcana Crystal and Horn of Valor tend to be pretty good. So we can kind of go here and look at the Warcraft logs. The top trinkets here, I don't really have the best trinkets because I have my Holy Trinket, not my Rep Trinket. But the best trinket's going to probably be a combination of Seeping Scourgewing with the Courage Trinket. I mean, obviously, if you get Amanthul, if you're lucky to get that, then that would be great too. But like you'll see some of the people right here, Amanthul's Vision, right in the top parse here. But Sweeping Scourge Ring, notice how it does additional damage if there's no enemies within a certain amount of yards. So when there's enemies, like on Antorus High Command, you're probably going to want to use the Legacy. and then when you go back to the other bosses, you're going to probably want to switch back to the Seeping Scourge Wing. So you're going to want to look for the Scourge Wing off of Vermothrus, and then the Khaz'goroth's Courage. It's going to be big, and then for AoE, you might want to consider swapping out the Scourge Wing for the Legacy, right? But you do see some people on here with Arcana Crystal. So if you're lucky enough to get an Arcana Crystal, then Arcana Crystal definitely is good. Some people here with the top parse with Arcana Crystal, so definitely something to look for. So I would say Arcana Crystal, Aman'Thul's, right, or the Courage, most likely the Courage unless you get super lucky, and then that the Scourge Wing and the Legacy. Okay, so those are really the trinkets you're gonna be looking for. And I just don't have, I'm using a 965 Horn of Valor. You can make other trinkets work, right? But I'm just talking about, what should you really be looking for? This is the best thing I have currently, right? And it lines up nicely with my wings, so. Okay, so I think that covers a lot in terms of the legendaries that you want to look for. Obviously, Prydaz has its place, and some other legendaries have their place, like Aggramar's Stride for mobility real quick if you want. But that's the general idea of what you're going to want to do. And so you do have some options here with your stat weights. You just kind of have to do the research for yourself, and hopefully that helps. All right. So that is the gear and the legendaries. Let's move on to playstyle. So the playstyle is going to be different for a multi-target rotation and a single target rotation. Not by much though. So really the main difference is that you're going to choose Divine Storm for 2 or more targets, and you're going to go with Templar's Verdict for 1 target. So what we need to do is you'll see a detailed video of this in a second. I'll break it down in slow motion, but the general idea is that we want a Judgment first. That's because most of the time you're not in range. You want to get it on cooldown immediately, and you pretty much have to do Judgment before you do your first spender anyway. You want to get this on cooldown. So really the argument is, hey, Judgment is in range right now. Okay, that's the first thing I'm going to do, and then I'm going to come in closer, and when I get in range, I'm going to do that Blade of Justice, and then when I come in even closer, I'm finally in range. Now I can finally do my Templar's Verdict, but before I do that Templar's Verdict, I'm going to want to pop my Crusade. The reason you wait to pop your wings if you're using Crusade is because you don't get your full damage bonus immediately. You get a garbage damage bonus, okay? You get literally 3% haste and damage. That's it. So that's nothing, right? So the goal is the second you pop this Crusade, in order for it to do anything really, you need to build it up. And the only way to build it up is by using your Templar's Verdict and your Divine Storm, your spenders. And so the idea is the second you hit that Crusade, you want to pop a Templar's Verdict or Divine Storm based on single target or multi-target. Okay? And then after that, it becomes a little complicated. Also, the reason I like to use Blade of Justice before I get into melee range is because, remember, the auto attacks trigger the Blade of Justice to reset. So a lot of times I'll go in, and right as I use Blade of Justice, right when I get into melee range, it'll automatically proc, and then I'll have another Blade of Justice waiting. So there's a lot of cool things that you can do. Yes, they're procs, but you can kind of predict when they're going to happen sometimes. Because when I'm first entering combat, it hasn't procced at all, and it's got a pretty high chance of proccing right away, and we don't want to waste that proc. All right, we want to use that Blade of Justice before we get into melee range a lot of times. Okay, so that's the general idea. We're gonna Judgment, and then we're gonna run closer, and then wings, and then however, what do you do after this? So what I just did is like not ideal, right? So this is not what you are fully supposed to do. You can't just run in there and do what you want. I still pulled like 2 mil, but that's garbage compared to what I could have pulled, right? I should be bursting a lot higher. The reason is that you never used your Wake of Ashes, so don't forget, right? So the first thing you're gonna do, okay, so the first thing you're gonna do, remember, you're gonna Judgment, and then you're gonna hit this. You're gonna have 2 combo points. Then you're going to hit your Crusade. Then you're going to do your Templar's Verdict. You're going to have no combo points. Perfect time right now to hit your Wake of Ashes. Now you generate all your combo points again. And then you can start spending and building and spending and building. Just make sure that you always have judgment on your target before you actually spend. So I have judgment. That's going to increase the damage by 69%, at least for me, by my Templar's Verdict. So if you accidentally let this fall off and then you do it, you're missing out on a ton of damage. The other thing for multi-target, just a couple of pointers real quick, is that judgment, yes, you're going to get it on 2 people, but remember, when you're doing your Divine Storms, make sure that you're lined up so that you can hit both of them, okay? So remember, if I do my Divine Storm this way, it's not actually going to do, well, that did because I was a little too close, but let me go like this. So I'm faced away, and then I'm right about here. I'm going to do that. It doesn't damage them behind me. And then if I do this, and I'm right about the same spot, I can send that forward, and then it does that damage. So that, remember, that goes back to your artifact here, and it says that it projects your Divine Storm forward. So you want to make sure that the enemies, many enemies as you can, are in front of you when you're doing your AoE rotation. And obviously try to keep your judgment up on as many as you can. Like, you're still only going to try to use Divine Storm when you have judgment up too. So that's the general idea. You also can use Potion of Prolonged Power. That's the cheaper one. But ideally, you're not going to want to use that one. You're going to want to use the armies, the Countless Armies one. But those are, I think, a little more expensive. I just have a whole bunch of Prolonged Powers, so I don't really care all that much. I use Prolonged Power. It's cheap. And then don't forget to have your buffs up, right? So we never had those up. That's going to give you that strength, the 4%. Use an Augment Rune if you can. I have the free 2 things here, so if I'm lazy, I'll pop the Fell Focuser. That's good enough for me from the Armies of the Legion Fall. And then if I really want to do maximum damage, you got to pop the Flask of the Countless Armies. That's pretty much about it. Just make sure you actually do a pre-pot. I'll walk you through it in slow motion here in a bit, but that's the general idea for your abilities. Also make sure you're using your Shield of Vengeance. You can use it offensively and defensively, so a lot of people don't use this, but when you use this, it absorbs damage and then deals damage, so that's really important to keep that, use that as much as you can. Taunt is a thing that you can do, right? And stun, like, taunt is something that I do a lot. Like, I can, as a Rep Paladin, you have the ability to taunt the boss with that protection from your auto bubble if you need to. Like if a tank dies real quick and we're waiting on a battle res, that's definitely something you could do. The slow comes in handy sometimes. Make sure you're using that interrupt. Just all basic stuff pretty much that I think you'll be pretty familiar with the rest of this. The only thing is I do see a lot of Rep Paladins too that don't actually help the raid out very much. Like, they're not using their Bop, they're not using their Lay on Hands, they're not using their Blessing of Freedom because it's going to mess up their damage. Well, try not to think as much about the damage. Yes, it's cool, but like if you're doing progression and you see somebody at 10% health or 5% health, like, why don't you target them and do Lay on Hands? I've actually had to stop my DPS and do some flashlights on myself or on other people just to keep myself alive. Or sometimes you'll have to work in a Justicar's Vengeance. Don't forget about that, right? Don't forget about this tier right here, whatever you go. Sometimes you're going to have to work in a Justicar's Vengeance. Hopefully you're going to do it on a proc, so you're going to wait for your you're gonna wait for your ring to proc, right? And then it's gonna proc, and then it's gonna be free, which is kind of nice. It probably won't proc for me here, but let's see. There it is. So now it's free, right? So you have this free Justicar's Vengeance, which usually costs 5 holy power. Watch my health, ready? Boom. It's a little heal. It's like 640, but it can crit too. And remember, it also does more damage when the target's stunned. So that's something to consider if the target's stunnable. But, it helps, right? I mean, it does damage. You're going to maybe lose out on a little bit, but it does damage, right? And it's free. It usually costs 5 holy power, and it's a way for you to maybe play a little bit more defensively if needed. So those are all things to keep in mind. And I think we are ready to move on to the videos. So the only other thing that I think I forgot to mention is something that a lot of people forget, and that is the Retribution here. It's not a big deal, but like, it's good to be aware of. So when any party or raid member within 40 yards dies, you gain 20% increased damage done and 30% reduced damage taken for 20 seconds. it's pretty nice to know. Like when your allies are dead, like it empowers you in their place, kind of. So that's interesting, right? So you can kind of go through and just make sure you're familiar with everything. It really does help. Anything that you're knowledgeable about, like all the stuff that you're reading is going to go into making better decisions, and that's really what the game is about, especially when you're talking about managing your holy power. You never want to go over 5, right? So like, let's say we're going to make a decision. What do we do here? Well, let's say I'm waiting for Judgment to come off cooldown, and I can get another 2 right here. I'm going to use that proc, and I just made that decision. Right now, am I going to make the decision to Crusader Strike? Well, no, because I'm not going to waste that holy power, right? So just common sense decisions you got to make on the fly based on your procs and based on your holy power. You want to make sure that you're down to no holy power if possible, or at the most 1 when you use your Wake of Ashes. So I'm at no holy power, and then the Wake of Ashes generates 5. So just, like I said, common sense decisions. Don't be wasting your holy power. That's definitely going to be important. Remember, your playstyle also changes based on your legendaries a little bit, right? And it also changes based on your 4 set. So I'm assuming you have 4 set, so that way when you use Judgment, your spender is going to be reduced by 1. That's definitely going to change your opener. So if you don't have 4 set, you might have to play a little bit differently. Or maybe if you have the old set, like the old 2 set, which is still somewhat good, maybe you're running 4 set, 2 set. So you got to just kind of take all of this into consideration and make good decisions based on your current setup. So with all that said, I think we're ready for videos. So this is a heroic Aggramar, and we'll take you through this opener in slow motion. So first thing I'm going to do is pre-pot at about 2 or 1 second. So you'll see that happen. The only thing I'm in range of the boss to be able to do right now is Judgment. So first thing I'll do is Judgment right after I pre-pot. So you'll notice I keybind my pre-pot right around 2 seconds. I have my flask on. Here's the pre-pot right about now. Pre-pot, then Judgment, and then you do your blade right after that to generate that power. Then I'm waiting for my global cooldown, then I'm going to Wings and Templar's Verdict. Wings, Templar's Verdict, then immediately I'm going to use my Wake of Ashes to get that on cooldown. And then I'm going to start spending holy power, and I'm going to try not to waste it. So I want to spend it as quick as I can because I'm trying to build it up. But I also want to make sure that I try to get off as many as I can in 4-second intervals because of my cloak. So you'll notice right now I get 1 more off right before my Judgment falls off. I have to reapply Judgment. And then I still have the buff from my cloak, and I'm about to get another one off. I still have 2 seconds left of my cloak. I'm still building, and then I get another one off right before that buff comes off. I build myself back up again. I continue to just do this rotation back and forth between building and spending, and then I'm about to get Judgment back up, so you'll see me use Judgment soon. There it is. And notice how I'm going to start to overtake damage. Paladins really don't start off with high burst, but now that my stacks are built up, I'm ready to go up to the top of the charts here. And so you just continue to manage your procs as well. You got a proc right there, so you got to use it as quick as you can. You got a Judgment coming up soon. You just got another proc you got to be able to use. So we want to make sure we don't use that without our Judgment on there. So I got a Judgment. Then I'm going to start using stuff. And then use that proc on the blade. And use your Crusader Strike as kind of like a filler, almost at the top of the charts here. This is just all in the duration of the opener. So by the end of the opener, you definitely should be high up there and over 3 mil, let's say. And try your best. I mean, it happens so fast, you just got to kind of know what you're doing here. Now I pop my artifact ability coming up soon, so you'll notice how that's about to come up. So my artifact, my Wake of Ashes, is coming up, so I'm going to spend myself down. Now I have just one holy power, then I'm going to use my Wake of Ashes. Right after I judgment. I could have actually done the Wake of Ashes before, but you got to make decisions on the fly. You back up to 5. And then I used my shield, if you notice there, so it's going to actually break and do damage to the boss. So I used that on purpose. That's actually going to give me some extra damage here. And then I get knocked back. All of that detonated onto the boss, giving me a little extra damage. And then it looks like we are going to reach the transition soon at 80%. My judgment is off, so the next thing I need to do pretty much is get that judgment on there. You'll see at some points, you might make a mistake and you might accidentally use a spender without having judgment on the boss, and that's a huge DPS loss, and it does happen. It's easy to make a mistake when you're popping off these abilities so quickly. Notice how I stay in as much as I can here. If you really want to, you can bubble it, but I don't think I want to waste my cooldown bubble, so I stay in as long as I can, but then about half cast you start getting out. Actually this particular one I think I stayed in, yeah. So I stayed in on this one just to try it out. So it disorients me, but notice how my Wake of Ashes will proc and get me out of that disorient. It just cost my healers a little bit more, but hey, not a big deal. Then we hit transition. So that just gives you a general idea of how you're going to open up. So we've reached the end. Hopefully you enjoyed. I'm sure a lot of it was a review for some of you. Hopefully you all picked up something from the video. And my goal is just to get as much accurate information out there as I can, just to be helpful, things that I wish that I would have heard when I was first learning how to play. Just I wish that I could go back in time and watch this video and just I'd be up to date with what I should do. So let me know what you think. Give me some feedback. I value your opinion. If you have any tips and tricks that you do, please let us know. Also feedback about the video, like last time I got some feedback on one of my other guides that I was moving around too much. I was I had some annoying sounds going off and things like that, and I'm trying my best to make it an enjoyable educational experience here. So just let me know, like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.